Hi there, this is Solitaire Ronan from Solitaire Ronan Films, and welcome to another episode of Filmstock. Today I thought I would do a subject that won't cause any controversy or debate. I'm just going to discuss the greatest male actor of all time in cinema history. Obviously this is subjective. Obviously it can change, but I'm going to give you who I think is the greatest male film actor of all time in history. You know, a subject that won't garner much debate. So thinking about this, first of all, I think we do kind of, as film fans, hold directors and actors sometimes to impossible standards. We kind of forget that they are human. Well, most of them are, Tom Cruise notwithstanding. And acting is a job. There's plenty of actors who aren't stars, who pretty much need to keep working to pay bills. Yes, sometimes actors' bills are a little bit different from the bills that you and I pay, but they still have bills. And like the Screen Actors Guild has over 100,000 members. I can't remember the exact figure, but obviously there's like a fraction of that number that are ever working at the one time. So unless you're Daniel Day-Lewis, you can't really pick and choose to make films, only appear in a film every 8 years or something. Excuse me. The majority of actors need to keep working, and if you enjoy your craft, you kind of keep working. But again, I think we sometimes are a little bit too harsh on people for going, why are you appearing in a film like that? It's very much like when a band changes their sound slightly. We criticise them for changing their sound and without asking us. So I think the basic is acting is a job. I know we want to hold people to a higher standard and it's art, but sometimes you do have to pay the bills. That being said, I kind of wanted to have some criteria as far as trying to judge who is the greatest male actor of all time. So the first one is longevity. Did you actually have a long career? Now that doesn't mean quality, we'll get to that in a bit. So obviously people like James Dean, the Burning Comet, you can't really call, in my opinion, you can't call James Dean the greatest actor of all time. He was only in a handful of films. Sadly for me, Laird Krieger, who I'm a big fan of, he only had a 5-year career. So you can't really call people that didn't last too long. You have to have a fairly long career. Are you still working? When I do a video on female actors, it's obviously harder for them because, especially Hollywood, once you get past a certain age as a woman, it's like you don't exist anymore. Male actors have a longer career. That's just a fact, unfortunately. So did you have a long career? The second criteria is the peaks and valleys of that career. How high were your peaks? We can all name actors who for a decade or for 5 years or 2 decades had peaks, but there's also certain of those actors who also had valleys. So it's pretty much how high are your peaks, how deep are your valleys. And that leads to consistency. To use a baseball term, your batting average. You know, if you're only in like 25 films and they're all good and all your performances are good, then obviously you're going to have a higher batting average than somebody who's made 200 film appearances, and some of them obviously aren't as good as the other ones. It's hard to do. I mean, personally, I don't get why people go on about John Ford being one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Obviously, people disagree, and that's fair enough, and it's all subjective. That's why we're here. Because John Ford directed over 100 films, and I'm sure I haven't seen all 100 odd John Ford films. Let me know in the comments below if you've seen them. But I'm sure his batting average can't be that high compared with Tarkovsky or Sergio Leone, just because they made a lot less films. So they probably wouldn't qualify in that kind of competition. So it's the same with an actor. What is your batting average? What is your consistency throughout the length of your career? The other category is diversity. Now, a lot of that has to do with casting, and obviously if you look a certain way, you're not going to get the same amount of parts as people who look another way. And I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about, aesthetics of your face and star power and all of that nonsense. So what kind of roles do you get? But that shouldn't be held against people. It's more about art house. Can you do Hollywood mainstream? Can you do art house? Can you do kind of hokum? Can you do comedy and drama? And what's your range? That kind of thing. The fifth one is a bit more of a pedantic one, but it's, do you develop a shtick? Now, we can all name actors who get to a certain point in their career and develop a shtick. Are you working as hard later in your career as you did early in your career? And again, this is where we hold actors to a higher standard than we probably hold ourselves. Because if we're being honest with ourselves, we don't work as hard in our 50s or 60s than we did in our 20s and 30s. Maybe you do. So again, very much like bands who have been about for 30 or 40 years and fans get upset at them because they're not doing their best work. It's like you generally don't do your best work when you're older, but it's whether you essentially just phone stuff in, whether you just develop a shtick and just stick to that stick, or are you still improving and still kind of evolving, or do you just get to a point in your career that's you pretty much done? So if you kind of take all of that, I'm sure you can let me know in the comments below what your criteria would be. Obviously this is just a very silly subject to talk about, but I thought I'd talk about it anyway. So from all of that, I think there only is one actor that is the greatest actor of all time in history, which I'm not going to mention until the end. You could fast forward to the end and save yourself a lot of trouble and just find out, and then lambast me in the comments. So I'm just going to go through some groups of actors. Again, I've completely forgotten about people And again, you can let me know in the comments. I'm not going to go through every single male actor in cinema history. But I'm just going to start with Conrad Veidt and Emil Jannings, a couple of guys who started in the silent era. I'm a much bigger fan of Veidt than I am of Emil Jannings, especially what Emil Jannings did politically. Again, Conrad Veidt died pretty early, so again, he doesn't have that big of a career. But Conrad Veidt is fantastic. You then have the theatre guys like Laurence Olivier and Gielgud and those kind of guys, who are obviously awesome. But again, for me, they're not the greatest actor of all time in cinema history. You then have the early-ish kind of non-English language actors, Jean Gabin and Anton Walbrook. You have the kind of British wave of Albert Finney and Alan Bates and Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole, who are all fantastic. But again, if you talk about peaks and valleys, if you talk about consistency, if you talk about developing a shtick, then pretty much all these guys are going to be eliminated. You obviously have the Hollywood, the golden era, if you will, of Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda and Gregory Peck and Cary Grant, who again are certainly in the running, but I think they all got to a certain age where they were pretty much just phoning stuff in. But again, this is not a criticism. This is just kind of talking about the criteria and how I got to the answer of the greatest actor of all time in the world ever. I mean, I love all these guys. And then in America in the late 60s, early 70s, you had obviously De Niro and Pacino and Keitel and Jack Nicholson, Donald Sutherland, obviously from Canada, Willem Dafoe and Christopher Walken. But again, if you're looking at high peaks, I mean, these guys have all had high peaks, but they've had valleys, the length of their career, the tail end. I mean, yes, it's subjective, but I think we can all agree for a certain period of time, De Niro is kind of the agreed greatest actor, certainly of his generation. But again, since probably Heat and Casino, it's not been great. And again, there's that phoned in element, there's that laziness element. But again, De Niro had Tribeca going on, so he did have to pay bills. So that's probably part of the film choices he made. You know, but again, he kind of sleeps through performances now, and has done for quite a while. So again, I think, Nicholson in the 70s was amazing. You know, in The Shining, he's amazing. But again, Nicholson late in his career just developed a shtick. His performance in The Departed is just one of the worst performances you'll ever see on screen, as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, I hate The Departed on so many levels. But his performance in The Departed is otherworldly. People criticise Nicolas Cage, but I don't think Nicolas Cage has had as bad a performance as Jack Nicholson has in The Departed. Obviously, Nicolas Cage isn't on this list, but again, he gets criticised for just continually working. But it is a job, and Nicolas Cage perhaps personifies the fact that acting is a job, because he's continually making 3 or 4 films a year. But he maybe just enjoys the process. Again, back to Europe, you have Jean-Louis Trintignant, you have Alain Delon, Mastroianni. Again, all great actors, and they're certainly give a good shout for being close to the greatest actor of all time in history. You can probably guess where I'm going, but I mean, Jean-Louis Trintignant, certainly diversity, certainly his consistency and batting average. Hasn't had too many valleys. I don't think he's developed a shtick at all. So Jean-Louis Trintignant would certainly be near the top. The same with Alain Delon and Mastroianni. Obviously, you have to talk about the Japanese power trio of Mifune, Nakadai, and Takeshi Shimura. Again, they're near the top. They are up there again. Consistency. You could argue Mifune did develop kind of tics and was more of a physical actor than the other two. But again, his peaks are pretty spectacular. So it seems that I'm leaning towards kind of more or less Hollywood actors, which is correct because I am. And the Japanese power trio is certainly pretty high up on the list. I mean, I should say there isn't really anybody from the last 20 years that I would really consider anywhere near the running. Obviously some great actors that I really like, but I don't think any of them are in the running for the greatest actor of all time. I would like to mention Chiwetel Ejiofor, who I think is probably the best actor of his generation. And it's really strange because I thought after 12 Years of a Slave he would kind of be catapulted into stardom. Maybe it's his name, maybe if it was Chiwetel Smith he might do better, but he does seem to have been relegated to kind of supporting roles and the dreaded exposition guy. I mean, I love Chiwetel Ejiofor. I thought his turn as a villain in Serenity was like one of the best villain turns, because he wasn't hamming it up. He knew exactly what he was. The guy, his character, knew he was a villain and he did bad things. There was not an ounce of moustache twirling, which actors are very tempted to do when they play villains. But that's a side note. There's nobody really in the last 20 years that I would consider anywhere near the top of the tree. So I might as well put you all out of suspense. Again, there'll be plenty of people that I haven't mentioned. You'll have your own opinion, obviously. That's why I do these videos, so I can read the comments, so you can all tell me how silly I am. But for me, the greatest actor of all time, male actor of all time in history, is Max von Sydow, or Max von Sydow. To me, he is just the best when you go through the criteria of longevity. Plus the world did get a lot worse when he died. His career spanned decades. The peaks and valleys. His peaks are pretty impressive. I can't think of too many valleys. Again, people can correct me, but I can't think of too many valleys in von Sydow's work. His consistency, the batting average of the man, is spectacular. I've never seen a film where he's bad. I've never seen a film where he's hamming it up. I know people might mention one, but I'm going to get to it. Diversity. He is obviously famous for working with Bergman, but he also did mainstream Hollywood. 3 Days of the Condor, and He also did, Minority Report for Spielberg and blah blah blah. So much stuff. He also did Holcomb, Flash Gordon, which is actually a gritty documentary of life on Mongo, but Flash Gordon, Dreamscape, another film that's complete nonsense. But von Sydow brings a gravitas to it. His performance as Ming is just absolutely wonderful. He wasn't confident about how he should play him or whatever, but he plays him to perfection as this fascist dictator. There's a real glint in his eye. It's a wonderful performance. There's no way that is a camp performance by von Sydow. It's a wonderful, gritty portrayal of a fascist dictator who just happens to be the emperor of the universe. So he's done big films, he's done small films. There's a lovely little, I think it's a Spanish film, Intacto, which he was in, which was in the 90s, which is a wonderful little film. He was in Citizen X, which is one of my favourite serial killer films, about a Russian serial killer. You could argue, he hasn't done slapstick comedy or anything like that. So perhaps his range isn't the widest range in the world. But when you look at the films that he has done, deep art house, he made the move, he's done mainstream Hollywood films, he's done his fair bit of kind of hokum nonsense light films. As far as developing a shtick, being lazy, phoning performances in, to me, he's never done that, or he never did that. When you saw Max von Sydow on screen, he brings a gravitas, an authenticity, a truth, a nobility to his performance, even when he's playing a villain. You believe in that villain, and that's why, for me, Max von Sydow is the greatest male actor of all time in cinema history ever. But obviously, I want to hear your opinion of how crazy and stupid I am for even coming up with this video. But I just thought it would be a fun little exercise to try and get some criteria of how you would actually judge these guys. I mean, I didn't even mention Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, who again had a long career, peaks and valleys. But for me, they can't compete. I mean, it is obvious that I would say maybe the top half dozen are all non-English language, non-Hollywood actors, but that's just a coincidence. The French, the Italian, the Japanese power trio, and obviously the Swedish top man. So thanks very much for watching. Please leave your criteria for acting if you have any, and who you think is the greatest actor of all time in cinema history, the male version. And hopefully you'll join me again for more nonsense Filmstock. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.